VanEck talking about the headwinds that face Bitcoin and crypto. Joining us to talk more about this is Matthew Sigel, VanEck, head of digital assets research. VanEck's new finance income fund is listed among the top 50 Genesis creditors, with Genesis owing VanEck $53 million. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the program. Before we get to VanEck and Genesis, I want to just get your thoughts on the underlying asset, right? There's been a huge run-up in the price of Bitcoin, and I get that it could be partially the dollar. Maybe people think the Fed's done. The economy is doing better than expected. What do you think's behind the run-up?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors that have led to an incredibly strong start to the year. Bitcoin was up 16 out of the first 18 trading days of the year. The most important is that global money supply growth bottomed in December. So we don't see that in the US, where M2 growth is 0, but in the rest of the world, it started to reaccelerate, and historically that's been an excellent indicator for a Bitcoin bottom. That happened in early December. We're also seeing a strengthening Chinese RMB. Historically, that has also been very positive for the Bitcoin price. The Fed funds price simply bottomed in December as well. We saw the same thing happen in 2018. Fed funds price bottomed shortly after Bitcoin did as well. We've got a debt ceiling debate going on. US CDS spreads are at their highest since 2011. We would expect that issue to raise its head over the next number of quarters and years and to be a tailwind for Bitcoin. So I think those are some of the factors: a slightly different macro tape, a better outlook for inflation.
What's amazed me, and Kaylee and I wake up every morning at 2 or 3 and check the Bitcoin price, shocked that it's not getting destroyed by the implosion of FTX and now the bankruptcy of Genesis. Why do you think it's able to weather these kinds of crises?
I think that you checking it at 3 a.m. is a good clue, because if you look at the price action of Bitcoin year to date, we've seen remarkable strength during the Asian trading hours. That's where the bulk of the gains have come. Negative returns in the U.S., negative returns in Europe, flattish returns in the U.S. So I think sometimes U.S.-based investors will over-index to regulatory issues or SEC headlines, and what they're missing is the big picture, which is emerging markets looking to stablecoins, looking to Bitcoin as a neutral way to transact value without intermediaries.
Interesting. All right, I'd like to return to the Genesis issue, because as Matt mentioned, one of the top 10 creditors is VanEck, $53 million. How confident are you in a recovery of that?
So first, I want to say that the creditor is the VanEck New Finance Income Fund, which is a private fund open only to institutional investors. So even if these were securities, our fund is unaffected. It's in the bankruptcy filings that fund is, I think, the number 11 creditor to Genesis. Some bankruptcies result in no recovery for creditors. Some bankruptcies can result in a full recovery for creditors. We see substantial assets at DCG. We hope and expect that DCG is going to kick in, and we see the possibility for a full recovery. If you look at the public filings in the day one bankruptcy hearings, it's disclosed that there are more than 10 iterations of term sheets that are going back and forth right now. So there are active negotiations. We think there's a strong possibility for a full recovery. We look forward to working with the U.S. trustee, DCG, Genesis, and the other creditors to effect that.
Well, Sonali mentioned this kind of issue of intercompany loans, how we're talking about a conglomerate here, and it all gets very messy with these different parts. From just kind of a digital assets research perspective, how has this changed the lens through which you view massive players like this and the kind of business that should be done with them?
Well, I think one of the reasons that we've gotten into this bankruptcy is that the SEC didn't approve a Bitcoin spot ETF, right? And instead, folks were whipping around this illiquid GBTC entity at wide premiums and wide discounts, and without a liquid instrument that trades at NAV, you're going to get into these types of messy situations. So that's one thing we could take from this, is that an ETF might have prevented this. The other thing is that the U.S. trustee will have extraordinary oversight into the bankruptcy proceedings. The judge, will be able to circumvent a lot of normal processes, and That might be something that Genesis and DCG would want to avoid, and that's why there's a lot of active negotiations.
Commingling of funds. The term commingling has become a watchword, right? Do you think that's what was happening here? Do you think there's a fraud?
There were clearly inter-party transactions and loans that were not well understood by the various stakeholders. And we'll see what the courts have to say about that. So there's multiple entities that will likely file suit. The Winklevoss brothers have said theirs is pending. Furtree has one. So we'll see if the court forces disclosure of all this and what that means for legal ramifications. But the short order is that there's substantial assets at DCG. We hope and expect that
Barry Silbert has the money. You need him to step up to the plate.
Yes.
Very well. Well, Matt kind of alluded to this already, the idea that this, in some ways, we thought may be an earth-shattering event, and it just simply wasn't when it comes to the assets that we're talking about. Are there other, if this was not it, potential negative catalysts that you could see coming down the line? How many more shoes need to drop in order for it to actually have a material negative impact?
On the Bitcoin price. So last December, we put out a forecast for this year. We identified 4 negative catalysts that might cause a weak Q1. One of those catalysts was a disorderly DCG bankruptcy, right? Instead, we got a rather self-contained Genesis bankruptcy and what looks to be like possibly constructive negotiations to resolve that. So I would say that that is a removal, tentative removal of one of the worst catalysts. The other was the potential that CFIUS was going to block Binance US's acquisition of the $1 billion Voyager assets. That deal was permitted to go through. So these are 2 negative catalysts where the worst case was averted. There's a possibility for 2 more negative catalysts. Hot inflation prints would obviously be negative for the Bitcoin price, as would a Ripple loss. So the SEC and Ripple expected to have a decision by the end of Q1. That would be a potential negative catalyst, but Bitcoin shrugging that off. It's been a great start to the year.
Matt Sigel, thanks so much for coming in. One of the most considered, intelligent voices in finance on crypto, so we're glad to have you here. Matt Sigel there.